Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Today we're tackling a phenomenon many of us are all too familiar with, news fatigue. From our screens and social feeds to what we hear in our headphones and daily conversations, we're constantly surrounded by a flood of information. Headlines demand our attention from every direction, leaving many of us feeling drained, overwhelmed, and even tuning out completely. We'll be unpacking the impact of news fatigue on our mental health, exploring how media organizations can better serve our audiences, and discuss ways that we can all engage with the news in a healthier way. Joining us today are two experts on the matter. Johnson-Phillips is the director of training and curriculum at the Solutions Journalism Network, where she develops resources and collaborates with partners to advance impactful reporting on social issues. She's also passionate about covering the Black experience and amplifying underrepresented voices through journalism. Thanks, Janelle, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Dr. Christal Badour, co-director of the University of Kentucky's Clinic for Emotional Health and an associate professor of psychology. Her expertise focuses on understanding responses to trauma. She often provides education on healthy ways to process community trauma like mass shootings, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters, including best practices for engaging with news coverage of these events. She holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Badour, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Dr. Badour, what is your understanding of news fatigue, and how does it impact people's mental and physical health?
Well, I think we can really think about it in the same way that we might think about fatigue generally, where it starts with kind of that feeling of being tired, a little bit exhausted, and it's really your brain and your body's way of telling you need to take a break. And that on its own is totally fine. And if we're able to listen to that, then we can regenerate and feel better and re-engage with the things that are making us feel fatigue. But one of the challenges with something like news fatigue is that news and the way we consume it has changed so much to where it is always at our fingertips, literally, right? With our smartphones and devices. And so we can get to the point where it really does lead to more strong fatigue, where we might start to feel things like burnout, where we might start to feel overly drained, really exhausted, start to feel apathy or frustration or anger. And that's when we really start to get into trouble in terms of how it can negatively impact and weigh our mental health, maybe start to leave us feeling sort of hopeless and helpless about the future. And then it's really not a good space to be in.
Absolutely. So you sort of talk about this accessibility and of this information is one of the factors contributing to news fatigue. Is there anything else you can think of?
Well, I think one thing we see is that increasingly Americans are consuming their news via social media, and algorithms in social media are really designed to polarize and to bring attention to negative information. And so when we're consuming that, it used to be we would get the newspaper in the evening and you'd get your little bite and then you could go away and get more positive interaction with real people. And we're getting less and less in that and more of this focused negative information. And so I think that is really one of the challenges.
Janelle, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that, I agree with everything Dr. Badour had to say about news fatigue. And I think it is a very important point that, yes, it's true. The way that we consume news all day, every day now has changed the way people relate to news. It used to be that if you wanted to watch a newscast or listen to a newscast, you knew exactly what time you needed to be sitting in front of the television for your 6 p.m. Local news, on your 6 p.m. local news channel. But nowadays you can turn on CNN and it's on all day long. MSNBC, it's on all day long, 24 hours. So no matter what time of the day it is, no matter what's going on, you can always go to some news source and be bombarded with information. And that's not always a good thing.
Janelle, you work at the Solutions Journalism Network. Can you explain what solutions-based journalism is?
Yes, I'd love to. So solutions journalism, by definition, is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social issues. So it doesn't just focus on the problem. It's not just about raising awareness about an issue. It's really delving into what people, what communities are doing to address those issues within their communities.
And then how does the challenge of news fatigue inform your work? And do you think it's just negative news that's contributing to this news fatigue, or is it all news?
Well, at Solutions Journalism Network, we definitely believe that it's heavy on the negative news. And so one of our missions is to try to change the way in which news organizations and reporters, editors approach the way that they are feeding news to their audiences. Um, and so by helping people to firstly understand what solutions journalism is and why it is something that every journalist should be aware of and try to implement into their work. Um, we have this saying at Solutions Journalism Network about telling the whole story. So if there's an issue in your community and a reporter does a story on it, okay, that's fine. That can be a start. But if there is someone, an organization, or the city council is doing something, or a state government is actually doing something about it, implementing some sort of pilot program, for example, or it could be more of a grassroots effort in the community. So if you know that something is being done to address it, you should also tell that story too. We've done research, or we've commissioned research with an organization called Smith Geiger. And what they found was that people are much more engaged with solutions journalism stories. They will seek those sorts of stories out because they are more uplifting. They're not as upsetting and depressing. They help people to be engaged in the way of wanting to actually be involved, because now that they know that there is something that they can also get involved in to help address this issue, they're more likely to also go back and visit those same news sources who produce those solutions journalism stories. And I know that every news organization is looking for loyalty. They want people to come back and watch and read and listen to their newscasts and to their stories. So we definitely think that implementing solutions journalism is also good for business, and it's also good for audiences.
So would you say, kind of within that, hearing that about that uplifting element to solutions-based journalism, that also good news can combat news fatigue?
Definitely so. I definitely think that that is one part of it. As solutions journalism, one of the pillars of a solutions journalism story is limitations. And so even solutions journalism, we do not try to make it out to be a magic bullet as if it's going to solve all of the news and distrust, but it can definitely help. People who have been surveyed about their consumption of solutions journalism say that they find those stories, they have more trust in those solutions journalism stories compared to those big stories of the day. Because let's be honest, it can take a little bit more time, a little bit more research, a little bit more knowledge on a topic when you're doing a solutions journalism story. It's not cut out for breaking news sort of situations. And so that gives people something to, dig their teeth into a little bit more and to ponder on a little bit more. And they're more likely to go and do their own research on the topic after hearing or after coming in contact with a solutions journalism story.
Janelle, I also want to ask you, I want to ask both of you this, like in your experience, do you think news fatigue is a new phenomena, or has it always existed in some form?
I would say that I think that it has always existed in some form. But again, I think that because of the way our news cycle has changed over the years and the access to news, back in the day, we didn't have social media. So you did not have, all of these different threads, news stories sitting right in the palm of your hand all of the time, right? And to be honest, sometimes the stories that we are coming across, they don't do the best job of truly explaining and breaking down an issue. I'm sure we can all agree that since pretty much the beginning of the year, there's been an onslaught of news that have left many people panicked, worried, confused, and part of that is because it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop, and people are not always getting those deep dives to truly explain what is going on.
Dr. Badour, same question to you. Do you feel like this has been around for a long time or has it changed? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is not a new issue when people are repeatedly confronted with difficult information, particularly situations that may feel uncertain or they may not know sort of where this is going or how it's going to impact me or my family. I mean, that's not new, right? I think what is new, as Janelle was saying, is the fact that we don't get a break from it. And so, what we know about the way that our body's our stress response systems work is that we need that time, right? We need that time to step away, to recover, to encounter the good parts of life, to balance out the challenging and uncertain aspects of life. And so I think that while not new, it is probably more likely to lead to burnout now because of how frequent it's happening. And then I think it's something that is becoming more and more noticed. So we're researching it more. We're seeing it in news stories. We're seeing it in, academic studies. And so I think while not new, there's probably a greater appreciation for how much it is impacting people.
Are you seeing this concern show up more in your work? Is it noticed more that way?
Yeah, I can say that I see it both in research in the work that we're doing, and then we also see it clinically. So this is an issue that I see amongst my mental health colleagues talking about how do we help our patients actually navigate kind of the uncertainties around the stress and the political environment, and how do we think about where the future of our country is going, where the future of our world is going. And so I think some of those larger kind of existential questions about what's happening to us in our world, um, it comes up a lot. And I've heard a lot of my colleagues just discussing, like, how do we deal with this? How do we really confront it, even when mental health professionals themselves may be encountering fatigue from it as well?
Absolutely. So, how does our brain process this distressing news, and why does it sometimes lead to avoidance instead of action?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So our stress response systems really are designed for short bursts of reaction. If you think about kind of like caveman era times, we were running from a tiger and we ran really fast and we pooped out all our energy and then we survived. And so then we could recuperate. But that's not our modern world, right? We have kind of bombarded with stress all the time. When we think about the stress of these uncertainties around the world that are kind of always at our fingertips, we do find that it's just really taxing on our body's stress response system. And so, what you might really notice is if you're starting to feel fatigue initially, it might be when you start to scroll on your phone or you turn on CNN or whatever news organization you're looking at. You might notice some anxiety or some you might notice feeling a little tense just waiting to see what the headline is going to be, and you might notice that as you're watching these headlines, and oftentimes you're not actually getting new information, you're continuing to watch sort of the same surface level information, and so you're not fulfilling your brain's need to kind of plan and anticipate things that could go wrong. And so then your brain can start to kind of fill it in for you, where you start to worry more about those things. You might notice tension in your body. You might notice that at night you're not able to sleep, that it's running through your head. Then, especially if you're consuming those things while you're laying in bed or shortly before you turn the lights out. And so we see that we start to really feel it in our body. And then we don't like that feeling, of course. And so what folks may start to do, especially if they're feeling like there's really nothing I can do about this, right? This is an uncertain situation. I'm feeling like I'm just one person in this big system. I don't really have control over it. So I'm going to avoid it entirely. I don't even want to know what's happening. And of course, that is not a great recipe for engagement and the kinds of things that we hope our citizens are involved in the direction that our country goes.
Janelle, I have a similar question for you. What effects do you think the decline in this news consumption when people are avoiding due to news fatigue have on society, particularly in civic engagement and public decision making?
Yes, well, over 30% of people worldwide say that they avoid the news. And so, but again, those same news avoiders are still more likely to say they are interested in positive or solutions-based journalism, right? And so when you ask the question, well, what are the effects? What are the impacts? Well, if we're getting bombarded by news and information and the same news and information, hour after hour, day after day, it's easy to understand why people will start to avoid it, tune it out, turn it off. And that can be healthy. It is important to take a break. I think it's also important to rethink where you're getting your news from, rethink how you are engaging with news and news sources. Do you need to have a notification on your phone every time there's breaking news? Probably not. Do you need to only visit certain websites or watch certain newscasts for your news? Absolutely not. It's totally fine to mix it up. There are news organizations out there who are trying to produce more solutions-focused news and more positive stories, not fluff and PR, like real, well thought out, well reported stories. And so it's important to try to find those sources in your local community and even on a, national, international level as well. And so I think that when people come in contact with those sorts of stories, they re-engage and they do become a little bit more, more likely to want to, again, get involved, get out there, share what they're learning with other people. And so, again, it's just really important for, news organizations to rethink how they are producing their news and for people to also reconsider who they are getting their news from.
Well, we'll be back with more after a break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and we are talking about news fatigue, the media's role, and healthier ways to stay informed with Janelle Johnson-Phillips, the Director of Training and Curriculum at the Solutions Journalism Network, and Dr. Christal Badour, Co-Director of the University of Kentucky's Clinic for Emotional Health. Dr. Badour, do you think journalists and media organizations have an ethical responsibility to consider the mental well-being of their audience?
I think that's an ideal situation to think about. I mean, when we think about journalism ethics, we think about a number of things that are important in the way that news stories are covered. And thinking about, in the area that I work in, thinking about how we cover disasters or other, awful situations that happen in our country. We often think about a duty to present the information that is sensitive, but also gets to the heart of what is happening. And I think that the flip is true, right? We know that the way that news stories are presented impacts the people who watch or consume them. And so I do think as we gain increasing understanding of the impact of news, not only on mental health, but also on people's perceptions of what's happening and their civic engagement, I think it's really important for journalists to take a step back to the core foundations of what is the purpose of journalism, to be able to do that in a way that is consistent with their ethical values.
And Janelle, we've been talking about, of course, solutions-based journalism. What do you think are the obstacles preventing more media organizations from adopting this form of journalism?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's one that we get all of the time. So from our journalists and editors we work with, a lot of times the answer is time constraints. How do I go about doing this when, again, the news is around the clock? My editor is asking me to, go out into the community and put a story together by 3 o'clock so they can be ready for the 5 p.m. newscast. How do I have time to do this? There's also the idea that a solutions journalism story has to be a long story, and that's also not true, right? And so one of the ways in which we, encourage journalists to combat this is by one, knowing a subject like the back of your hand. We know that sometimes, depending on what newsroom a journalist is in, they may be on a beat, they may not be on a beat. But that doesn't mean that you cannot have expert level knowledge in a particular subject. And so the more you know about a topic and the more likely you are to already have sources on deck around that topic, the easier it will be for you to put together a solutions journalism story in a shorter amount of time. We also, and we've also had people come to us and say, this is the way that I was able to do it. And so funny enough, some of the people within our network who have told us, when I pitch the story, I don't say, hey, I want to do this solutions journalism story, because there are certain ideas that some editors have and journalists have about solutions journalism. They think of it as a PR piece or a fluff piece, or it's not real news. And that's simply not true. When you're doing a story and you are looking at a response to an issue, you're looking at evidence to show that it's effective. You're looking at insights, so context, background information, takeaways that other people can use. When you're looking at limitations, because again, nothing is perfect. It may not work for everybody. It may not completely resolve or fix a problem, right? That's not a fluff piece. That's a really rigorous story, actually. But they'll tell us, I just lay my story out and I include the elements and I tell them these are the things that I'm going to include, but I don't necessarily say solutions journalism. And so our thing is, as a reporter, you know your newsroom best, and you know your editor best, and how to, communicate with them in a way that they will actually receive it. And so we encourage people to try to get as many of those elements into the story as possible. It does take some practice, but it's the same skill set that you use for any other story.
So then I want to turn to you, Dr. Badour. What are some steps we can take to manage news fatigue while staying informed as listeners and preserving our emotional well-being?
Fantastic. Speaking of solutions, right?
Yeah. Yes. Correct.
Yes. So one of the biggest things we know that can be helpful for fatigue of all types, including news fatigue, is giving your brain and your body a break. And so we need to do the same thing with the news. And so I think there's always this tension of we want to stay informed, which is important, and we want to take care of ourselves. And so when someone is starting to experience that fatigue, and perhaps it's around a particular news situation, perhaps it's news as a whole, we often talk to people about being strategic in the when and the how of your consumption. So it might be that you need to plan in some news breaks. So I love that Janelle mentioned, do you need a notification to pop up on your phone? Perhaps not. Perhaps you can set planned times that you intend to check in on the news, whether that is, I'm only going to look at the news once per day if you have that type of self-control, or maybe for some people, I'm going to set a 15-minute break from my phone, from my social media, from anything that's going to give me that information. And instead, I'm going to have a conversation with them. I'm going to take a walk outside where I don't have my headphones in and I'm just present in the world. And we know this in particular from guidance that we give, especially to families around, say, how to manage some of the anxiety that even children may experience when they're seeing stressful information on the news that they don't understand. And a big piece is being able to take a break and sit down to dinner together without any devices, and to sort of set that as an intention to give yourself that chance to recoup. So I think that's one piece. And another one is the how, right? It's how are you consuming the media? So it may be that you want to know information about specific types of events. And so rather than doing what we now have affectionately or not so affectionately referred to as doom scrolling, right? Like just scrolling through all the headlines to look at all the negative information, to instead specifically search for a topic that is of interest to you, that is important to you, that you want to read and learn more about. So there are some different ways that we can think about doing this that we know can be really helpful to re-energize people and help just with some of that fatigue and potential burnout that people may be feeling.
That's beautiful. All great tips. Thank you so much, Dr. Badour, for your expertise. And thank you, Janelle, also for your expertise here today on Track on news fatigue. And I feel like we have some tools now that we can move forward with. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janelle Johnson-Phillips is the Director of Training and Curriculum at the Solutions Journalism Network, and Dr. Christal Badour is the co-director of the University of Kentucky's Clinic for Emotional Health and an associate professor of psychology. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, if you find yourself tuning in, then tuning out, there's another balanced route. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.